pocket watch ticks in the background as a man breathes heavily. With love forever, Laura is engraved on the watch. Dominic wakes up, gets up, and turns on the light on his bedside table. He thinks to himself that he will not be able to finish his life's work, a book that he is writing. He sits up breathing heavily and drinks a glass of water. He starts crying, thinking that he will be forgotten and will die alone. He walks toward a barn that night and encounters a colleague in front of the building. The man asks him what he is up to. Dominic explains that he had a migraine and thought that walking out will help. The man points out that Dominic is wearing pajamas on a winter night. He notices that he was shivering and tries to offer him his jacket. Dominic refuses and leaves the man. He mumbles to himself that he will not lose the opportunity. He walks to another building and enters it. Two women light candles in the church. Dominic is passing by outside the building. A young man is selling newspapers about the war when suddenly it rains. Dominic hurriedly tries to open his umbrella, but he is not able to. The pedestrian traffic signal turns green and he walks, going to the other side. Lightning strikes him and sets him and his belongings on fire. The people around him panic and call for an ambulance. Although his body is burned, Dominic is still conscious. He remembers his past lover, Laura. Dominic wakes up in a hospital bed covered in bandages. Two doctors are talking to him and testing his functionality. Dr. Roman tells him that they are there to help him. Dominic squeezes his fingers in response. The doctor uses this gesture to communicate with him. They are able to know that Dominic is 70 years old, which surprises the doctors and nurses around him. He remembers a woman as he rests in the hospital bed. The woman listened to him admiringly as he told her about his passion, but he did not seem to achieve it and thought of himself as a failure. The doctor asks him if he has a wife. Dominic informs them that he does not, using the same method of squeezing the doctor's hand depending on a yes or no question. He is able to inform the doctors and nurses caring for him that he has a nephew, but he does not want them to inform him about his condition. The doctors and nurses are discussing Dominic's case just outside the hospital. He only has a distant relative that he does not even want to contact. Dominic is willing to take any test even if it is dangerous or painful to know if his nerves are damaged. Dr. Roman thinks that Dominic can be a good test subject. The nurses talk about Dominic as they change his bed cover. He remembers his time at the university. He falls asleep and remembers Laura. He told her that the university he was applying to required him to study different languages, Sanskrit, Japanese, Chinese, and more, in order to be great. He dreamt of the time his professor was teaching him Chinese and advised him to be familiar with Mandarin. The doctors are talking about a similar case, where a priest was hit by lightning and survived. Dominic moves in bed and the nurse tells the doctor to lower his voice because it seems like Dominic can hear him. The doctor replies that he wanted Dominic to hear him and get some sort of reaction. Immediately after, Dominic sits up in bed, yelling incoherently. The doctors and nurses check on him. The doctor requests his X-ray scans, then suddenly, Dominic's teeth fall out. When the X-ray scan comes in, they find out that he is growing a new set of teeth. Dr. Roman checks on him. He tells Dominic that he is out of danger and that makes him an interesting case. He should have passed away when he was struck by the lightning, or at the very least, he should have been paralyzed, mute, or blind. He is lucky that none of those things happen and his burns are recovering. Dr. Roman tells him that he will be taken care of, but it seems like he does not need that much help because of his extraordinary case. Dominic could not believe it because it is impossible. The doctor tells him that it is happening and they do not know how that happened. Dr. Roman comes to his bedside holding a newspaper. The media is starting to talk about Dominic's extraordinary case. He sees that Dominic has grown a new set of teeth. He tells him that they want to know more about him and asks him to cooperate. Dominic has always been stubborn when he was younger. The group of men were walking outside. The professor asked a young Dominic what it was he was writing about. Dominic eagerly told them their ideas. The professor chuckled at him, then asked when will he finish it. A man joked that it will take ages. Dominic replied it will take a long time and a lot of research. He hurriedly excused himself, leaving the group of men disappointed. It started to snow lightly, and he met with Laura in a park. Dominic sat beside her as she lit a cigarette. She told him her frustration. She felt alone. She told him that she wanted to help him out and believed in what he was doing, but Dominic seemed to shut her out. She thought that it will be better for the both of them to have their separate ways and broke up with him. Laura took her things and left Dominic alone sitting on the bench. Dominic is lying in his hospital bed. He looks in the mirror and thinks to himself, he needs to ask Dr. Roman that he needs a new identity. Dr. Roman arrived at the hospital in a black car. He lets the driver leave and hurriedly enters the building. Dominic is moved to a new room. Dr. Roman finds him lying lazily in his new bed. Knowing that Dominic wants to talk to him, he hands him a notebook and pen and tells him that if he could not pronounce some words, he can just write them. Dominic struggles to sit up. He tells the doctor his name and some information about himself, how old he is, his occupation, and where he lived. The doctor is fascinated by him. Dominic thinks that he does not believe him, so he asks the doctor if he could prove it in some way. The doctor asks if he could provide pictures of himself, especially when he was younger. Dominic says that he will have a hard time acquiring information. Romania is on the verge of war. The doctor decides that he will acquire the necessary information and do his best to stay away from trouble. The doctor looks at him with concern. Dominic pleads that he needs a new identity. Dr. Roman says that it will be a difficult thing to do. When Dominic gets better, a nurse helps him to go back in shape. She playfully shaves his beard and brings him his old clothes. A doctor comes to bring him to a soldier. Dominic leaves the hospital with the soldier in a black car. He saw this car in his dream and thinks that it is a bad omen. They stop at a huge hotel and go inside to a room where Dr. Roman is waiting. The room is for him to stay in where he can write or record his life. Dominic is having a hard time sleeping that night, so he decides to write what he can remember in Chinese. He is amazed by his memory. He records himself in a different language. He spends the rest of the night writing and recording in different languages. Dr. Roman comes in the next morning and Dominic is still writing on his desk. The doctor informs him that he will be able to get all the things from his previous home. When the doctor shows him the pocket watch Laura gave him, he is speechless. Dominic browses through his photo album that the doctor brought with him. He tells him how much he remembers from his picture with Laura. He tells the doctor about Laura. She married someone else and died from childbirth. The doctor is amazed by his peculiar case, but Dominic thinks that him having an incredible memory is useless. The doctor brings him to a laboratory to know more about his case. Nurses and researchers study and discuss his body. Among them was a Nazi spy who is interested in Dominic. Dominic is frustrated at the doctor. He did not expect what will happen and that the researchers will ask him undesirable questions. Dr. Roman explains that the board needs to see him to believe his reports. He mentions that Dominic has written erotic dreams he is having in his notebook and asks whether he is sure if those are dreams or not. Dominic is not sure but is doubtful that they are real. The doctor tells him about a young woman living in the vicinity. Dominic is curious, so that night he goes out to see the woman the doctor talked about. The woman tells him that they have met last night in her room, and then leaves. Dominic is having a hard time sleeping again. He goes to the woman's room. The woman strips her robe and invites Dominic to her bed. The security outside the building is on high alert as an intruder is driving outside the building. Meanwhile, Dominic is getting intimate with the woman. The woman has a Nazi logo on her lingerie. Dominic is back in bed hallucinating other versions of him talking to him, questioning his action and what is happening to him. He achingly wants to stop himself from thinking. He manages to stop his intrusive thoughts and continues with the woman. He finds a Nazi notebook under her pillow. Back in his bed, he finally starts to realize what happened to him. The lightning that struck him regenerated him and created other personalities. His other personality tells him not to let the doctor know about it. Dominic smiles to himself and is finally able to sleep. Soldiers have set up a crime scene where Dominic was struck by a lightning. The head soldiers are interviewing witnesses. Dr. Roman and Dominic are having dinner outside. The doctor informs him that the woman he slept with vanished. She reported all of their conversations. The doctor is worried that Dominic might get kidnapped. He is one of the most valuable specimens in the world, and a lot of researchers and medical schools want to study him. Another doctor arrives and asks Dr. Roman that he needs to go to his office immediately. 3 German soldiers are waiting for him in his office. They are already packing the documents of his patients when he arrives. The general tells him that his government orders him to surrender all the patients' documents. In addition, they want to take Dominic with them. Dr. Roman tells them that as his doctor, he cannot let that happen because of Dominic's condition. The general tells him that he will come back with a German doctor, then leaves. Dominic is lying in his bed naked, talking to his other personality about the human mind and its powers. He gets up and puts on his robe. They talk about what they can do. Dominic tests his other personality to put a rose in his hand, and there it is. He asks for a second rose, and it appears in his lap. His other personality asks him where he should put the third rose. Dominic mumbles to himself as the doctor watches him. The doctor informs him that the soldiers wanted him and they are making a move. A German doctor named Rudolf believes that high-voltage electrocution can cause a radical mutation in humans. His research reaches Adolf Hitler and makes Germans interested in Dominic's case. Dr. Roman tells him that the Germans want them to lend Dominic and that they are running out of time. At night, Dominic and the doctor travel to Romania using secret identities. Dominic records himself when they arrive in Romania. As the war continues in different countries, Dominic resides there secretly, moving from place to place. However, a woman is spying on him wherever he goes. He learns to forge documents to keep himself safe. He finally accepts that he is a mutant. He has knowledge and powers that are different from ordinary humans. He spends time in the library, acting like a normal human being, to finish his book about the origin of language. He holds a book and discovers that if he wants to know something, he simply needs to want to know and then he will know it. He goes to a casino and discovers that he can see the future and uses it to his advantage. A man approaches him and tells him how much he knows about him. He tells him that he is on a special assignment for the United States and claims that his organization can protect his identity and help him with whatever he wants. Dominic refuses by saying he must remain neutral in everything that is happening. Then he leaves the man. Dominic is lying in bed that night gathering information from several books. He turns off his bedside lamp but still has a hard time sleeping. He asks himself whether he will use his abilities for good or evil. A woman approaches Dominic at a party. She seems to know who he is, making him cautious about her. A man approaches him next, discussing human and experiments. He tells Dominic that they know who he is. Dominic pretends not to understand what he is saying and excuses himself. Dominic leaves the place running, but the man is able to follow him. The man wants Dominic to help him to end the war. Suddenly, the woman appears and tells Dominic not to believe anything the man says. She introduces him as Dr. Rudolph, Hitler's most dedicated scientist. She tries to stop him, but Dr. Rudolph shoots the girl. Dominic uses his powers to turn the gun to the man and shoot himself. World War II ended when Hitler died, but there are still countries at war. Dominic invented a new writing method to protect his writings from falling into the wrong hands. He is hiking up a mountain when a car stops in front of him. A young woman asks him what is the best way to go to the top of the mountain. Dominic is immediately mesmerized. He advises her not to go because there is a storm coming. The woman said that she and her companion are used to mountain storms. All of a sudden, the rain comes in. Dominic helps them to put back the car's roof. Veronica introduces herself and continues driving. Dominic becomes worried for the woman. He goes to the authorities to inform them that someone went to the mountaintop during the storm. He is about to give his information for the report, but he changes his mind. He says that he will check it himself, and if he did not go back, the authorities should look for him. Dominic rents a car to bring him to the mountaintop. He looks around until he sees the woman's car. Dominic and the driver get out to inspect the place. They see the woman's companion lying dead on the ground. Dominic hears a singing voice coming from a hole in the ground. He reaches his hand to help her up. After some time, the authorities and a medical team arrive at the location and help Veronica. Dominic learns more about Veronica from the authorities. She is suffering from amnesia and can only speak in Sanskrit. The authorities ask for Dominic's help to calm her down, as he is the only one who could understand what she is saying. He goes to her hospital room that night to keep her company. A group of men asks Dominic about Veronica's case. Veronica believes she is from India 14 centuries ago, and she is in the cave meditating for several months. When lightning strikes the top of the mountain, large rocks were discharged and blocked the opening of the cave. The men discuss it among themselves and decide to invite several doctors from different places to check on her. Dominic suggests some experts are needed to confirm what she is saying is true. The invited doctors arrive immediately. They commend Dominic for the report he did on Veronica. The doctors go inside Veronica's room and find her sitting in the corner. They greet her in Sanskrit and she greets them back. After their talk with Veronica, the doctors share what happened to the other doctors in the hospital and Dominic. The doctor tried to explain to Veronica her situation. She did not seem to believe them, but she was interested in what they were talking about. The doctor proposes to travel to India with Veronica to confirm the facts of her story. They also request Dominic to accompany them, to which Dominic agrees. The group travel by plane, with Veronica being put into a deep sleep. The plane lands at night and 2 vans and a large truck are waiting for them. They travel the road until morning and finally reach the meditation cave. Their group consists of Dominic, the doctors, the drivers, the journalists, and Veronica. The group goes down the vehicles with Veronica still sleeping on a stretcher. A native from the place is waiting for them to give them assistance. The native prays over Veronica until she wakes up. A tear falls from her eye as she talks to him. Veronica slowly gets up and looks around the place. She walks toward a mound and finds an opening. She suddenly screams and falls down. The group helps her back to the stretcher. The group blew up the mound that Veronica went to. When an opening is created big enough to be an entrance, the group goes in. They are looking around, holding lanterns and flashlights. Dominic sees human bones and examines the skull. Veronica is sleeping in her hotel bed. Dominic visits her and greets her awake. The experts think that an old soul was transmitted to Veronica. Veronica is finally able to remember who she is and what happens to her. She and Dominic are walking outside talking about the past few days. She could not believe what happened to her and what she did. They hurriedly go back to the hotel, but there is a lot of media waiting for them. That night, they go out into the market to explore and relax. They kiss in the car and decided that they should go somewhere far. Dominic and Veronica go to the Mediterranean island far from the people. They go to a house they rented where 3 workers welcome them. Veronica sits by the window and admires the view. They sleep together that night. Dominic tells her that he loves her. Veronica suddenly gets up talking in a language that he does understand. Dominic gets the recorder and records her. When she finishes chanting, she suddenly screams. Veronica is breathing heavily and sweating profusely. Dominic tries to approach her, but she hisses at him. When her legs give out, he catches her and puts her back to bed. Dominic tries to decipher what Veronica said in the recording from last night. He stands up from his desk and sits with her beside the window. He tells her that she must have been speaking a language before history. He takes interest in her and she might be able to help him in his book on the origin of language. She tells him that she wants to help him. Dominic admits that he is already really old. She jokingly tells him that if she is really possessed, she is older than him. The two of them go to a fancy restaurant dressed beautifully. Veronica gets upset when she reads an article about them being a couple in a magazine. She admits that she feels very tired all the time and something is happening inside her. Veronica is having a hard time sleeping that night. She sits in bed looking around the room. Dominic wakes up and finds that Veronica is not beside him. He goes outside calling her name. He finds her sitting on the rocks beside the beach. He hurriedly runs to her and tries to get her back, but she insists that he let her know what he really knew about her. She tries to jump in the water, but Dominic hugs her to prevent her from jumping. Dominic tries to use his power to learn what is happening inside her head. He tells her that she is seeing Shiva in her head. The two of them are exploring the area when Veronica sees Dominic's other personality in physical manifestation. She tells Dominic about it, but he says that no one is there. Veronica is back in their room sleeping. She dreams about an old man crawling in the woods. Dominic and his other personality are watching her. He tells her that he loves her. Her face becomes calm and starts to speak another language in her sleep. Dominic records her. Her language is going further back in the past. He keeps this up for 2 weeks. Veronica keeps talking in older and older languages. It will be the key to finishing his book. A doctor visits them in the place they are staying. He says that Veronica's body is aging faster and faster. She looks into the mirror and sees that she has already aged so much. Dominic hesitates to continue his inquiry because of the effects Veronica is suffering. He believes that he needs to be away from Veronica to reverse the effects of her aging. Veronica is against it, but he still leaves her. Dominic returns to the university he is staying at before. He sits in bed looking at a picture of Veronica and her daughter. He and his other personality are arguing about whether they should publicize the information he has. Dominic thinks that it will be catastrophic to let the information fall into the wrong hands, but the other personality believes that only knowledge is important and that the end justifies the means. This upsets Dominic, making him decide to cut his connection with his other personality. Dominic sits in bed looking through his old photo album. He puts the picture of Veronica in. He thinks about where the third rose should be. He walks back to the cafe where he wanted to. He sits alone at the table when his old colleague arrives. The other men are delighted to see him. He believes that he is dreaming at that moment and tells them what happened to him. He slowly ages back to his 70-year-old self and starts to forget what happened. He hurriedly goes out and suddenly he loses all his teeth. A man finds him lying deceased on the ground the next morning. After taking his passport, the man leaves him on the ground. The third rose appears in his frozen hand.